All right. A really, really, really exciting conversation that we've got planned for you guys around how, not just how software development is changing, but all companies are really becoming software development companies. We've got an amazing panel of some really, really cool, innovative companies that are not only innovating in software development, but innovating in entire industries. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but we've got Michael from John Deere, we've got Samir here from Target, we've got Dragos, who's coming here from Ford, and we've got Hima from GE Software. Hima, why don't you start?
All right, quick show of hands. How many of you put GE and software in the same place? Wow, half of them are GE people. My name is Hima. I lead the platform engineering organization that's based out of San Ramon. And the responsibility of this team is to build a platform that enables customers to build applications that connect their machines. It could be turbines, jet engines, could be locomotives, and sort of leverage the value from that data. Before that, I used to work at Sybase building mobile platforms and application servers.
I could have asked the same question. So I'm not sure how many people actually think of Ford and software at the same time, but I'm Dragos Maciuca. I'm the technical director for Ford in Silicon Valley here. We have an office in Palo Alto. We just opened it in January. We already have about 70 people looking at getting technologies from Silicon Valley and incorporating them in vehicles as vehicles become more and more software driven. Personally, I started my career in Silicon Valley, so I'm not a transplant from Detroit. Before Ford, I worked for Apple. Before that, I worked for Lockheed Martin. Before that, KLA, and then before that, BMW Technology Office, when they were first opening in the Valley. So I started with automotive in Silicon Valley, and now I'm back to automotive in Silicon Valley.
Hi, I'm Samir Shah. I manage data engineering team at Target with focus on building a platform for predictive analytics and building a product on top of it. So one of that is personalization engine that we built recently. Prior to that, I was at Demand Tech. Company was focused on building pricing lifecycle engine from optimization perspective. Got acquired by IBM a couple of years back. That's about me.
Hi, I'm Michael Davis. I work as a software engineer and tech lead at John Deere. To put a slightly different spin on the first question, I'd ask you, how many of you think of farmers as nerds? So at least one hand. Fair enough. So at John Deere, we've been delivering sort of technology and software to farmers for a while now. And starting in the end of the 90s, we delivered displays to farmers which allowed them to record what they're planting. Later on, 2002, self-driving tractors. We have GPS that will get accuracy of 2 centimeters. And this is all software-driven stuff. So, it really is, in many ways, a software company, but it's growing very quickly. So my history, I have been at John Deere for a couple of years now. I've worked on embedded systems inside vehicles, tractor displays, and now I'm working on mobile apps. And we have over 100 mobile apps, a colleague of mine just told me, available now on Android and iOS. And yeah, before that, I worked at the German Artificial Intelligence Research Center in Germany, obviously. And yeah, that's me.
Awesome. So I'm Kakul Shrivastav. I'm the VP of Product here at GitHub. Unlike these guys, I'm in the software industry. I've been in the software industry.
We announced a business called GE Digital, which took all the software sort of scope within different businesses and brought them together as a software company. I just found out that we make $6 billion, so we were talking about it's okay to invest $1 billion if you can make a $6 billion out of that. So it's a $6 billion software company hoping to get to top 10 software companies by 2020, roughly translates to a $15 billion revenue. So, big goals, But fundamentally, Jeff Immelt once said, it was like a couple of months back, he's the CEO of GE. We went to bed as an industrial company, woke up as a software and an analytics company. It's a profound statement. Every industrial company in the world is starting to think of the next competitor in the market is not a different industrial company. It's the software players that are going to eat their lunch, dinner, breakfast, everything. And so we all had to become a software company to retain our competitive advantage, and that's the goal for GE.
Thanks. Yeah, so the shift to software, to me, it's actually very personal. I felt it on my own. Like when I was at BMW in 2000, there was a fundamental shift from mechanical engineering to electrical engineering in the automotive industry. Now we're going through this, only 15 years later, through this fundamental change from electronics only to software driven. So people keep talking about cars being computer on wheels. It's really they're actually more like networks on wheels, right? We have easily 80 to 100 microprocessors that are all interlinked, connected, and now we're moving towards autonomous vehicles, which are going to require an enormous amount of software to process all the information from LiDARs to radars to cameras, image processing, sensor fusion. We have connected vehicles, right? You have all the data that goes to and from the vehicle. You need to worry about security. You need to worry about privacy. We need to worry about data analysis, right? All these vehicles full of sensors driving around, they can collect a lot of information about the environment, about the cars around them, to make the experience for the driver much better than it is today, but also for the drivers around them, for us as a company. The user experience, we can improve that tremendously, again, through software and being able to change on a yearly basis and keep improving it. So the software in vehicles nowadays, it has a fundamental change, and going forward, particularly with autonomous vehicles, is going to have a huge impact on how we look at developing a vehicle.
Great. So at Target, we call our customer guest. And from what we see today, guest that shops digitally and on store shops 3 times more than just people who are a guest who shops at store only. With 94 million millennials who are digitally connected all the time, they want to shop from wherever they want using whatever technology, whether it's mobile or an iPad or even on your machines there, or when they are at store, they are still connected. They demand that they get best experience, seamless experience, but at the lower cost. And that's only possible by doing and investing in a technology and software. And when I say technology, it includes not only software, but also Internet of Things or robotics. So these are things which are going to drive the future of retail space.
Yeah, so John Deere, I think I said yesterday, is a company that sells tractors. We don't really sell software, and that's changing. And in many ways, I'm sure the same applies for all of you as well, but a company like John Deere is using software at all these different stages. So we say, we have these dealer networks, and we provide them with the tools to sell vehicles, and we have lots of controllers on our vehicles. I'm sure we have, people like Continental are supplying the same systems to you that they are to us, and that's, that's the vehicle side. And then the future for us is pushing into data collection, collecting data about what people are harvesting, what's been applied to a field, how much nitrogen have you put on there, and then collecting all of that data and analyzing it is the next big challenge for us. And I think all these companies are facing the same problems in just slightly different ratios, and it's really interesting to see and to hear that you guys are facing the same challenges.
Yeah, so one of the questions I had for you is, as you're going through this transformation of turning these companies and these totally different industries into software companies, what have been some of the biggest surprises for you as you do this? And we'll switch this around. Samir, why don't you start?
So I think surprise is not as much for me, being, doing software for a long time, been related to the retail industry. But earlier, really the focus was on optimizing supply chain, or at the enterprise level, how you do merchandising more effectively, or how you do plan effectively. What change in the shift has happened is now in retail is really guest focus. Guests are demanding more. They want things now, and as a lot of surveys says, if we make, if they are able to get the goods on the same day, probably they will shop 64% more online. So really, it's now not about optimizing how you, of course, you need to do that, but really driven by guests and experiences they want, both online as well as in store.
Mm-hmm. Mike, what's been surprising for you?
So I've been at John Deere for 2 years, so not a particularly long time. One of the things that has surprised me, though, is that techniques for management and process control that have been used very successfully for manufacturing and design of vehicles, they don't really work very well for software. And I think that's a surprise for lots of people. You can say it's obvious, but it's really, really not. And that's been one of the big challenges for us as well, is trying to adapt the way our company works to better support software and to enable people to, or enable our engineers to deliver on time. And
so I'm actually going to probe on that a little bit more. So what are some of the ways that you manage software differently than you would a manufacturing process? I mean, what are some of the big differences?
So I can tell a little story of a manager of ours. He'd come to help manage a software project that we were working on, and we were sitting in a room talking about how this new process was going to work, and he said, oh, okay, so when this team is finished working on this component, they can move on and do something else. And someone asked the question, well, what about maintaining this? And he said, but it's done. Once it's finished, it's finished. And in some situations, this might be the case if you've designed a piece of hardware or maybe even an embedded controller. But for the system we were working on, which was an embedded Linux on a kind of 7-inch display sitting in a tractor, it's just really not the case. And I think that some of these the idea that you can finish a software project, if you still want to support it in the field, you could never really be finished.
That's great. That's great. What about you, Dragos?
Yeah, I don't know if I call it surprise, but to us it's basically the two heads we need to keep in mind. Is the one being in the automotive industry, which has to provide vehicles that are safe and regulated. And on the other hand, we have another head here in Silicon Valley where we need to move fast. So, by that what I mean is, for us,
you can't move fast and break things when
exactly,
it's cars.
Exactly. So it's one thing when you have your favorite software where you post pictures and it goes down for an hour and you maybe get annoyed because you can't share your pictures. It's another thing when you have an issue with your car and it stops working at 60 miles an hour in the middle of the highway, or it's a completely different situation. We're highly regulated. We have people's safety in mind. For us, there is no such thing as minimum viable product. We can't do trial and error with our customers. On the other hand, the interaction with the in-vehicle infotainment system, certainly we can do things differently there, where that one is a lot more like a consumer electronics device, and we can certainly move faster in there. So we basically constantly need to decide to move at two speeds, depending on what we're exactly doing with software. And we constantly need to educate both sides, both here in Silicon Valley, that there are areas where we absolutely cannot move faster because we need to test every piece of code that we put in. And at the same time, we need to educate our colleagues back in Detroit that some things can be done faster and that we can take some risks. So it's really hard to be able to go at two speeds at the same time, but this is the path we need to head towards.
That's great.
Quick story, just when I joined GE, I came from a mobile experience. I knew everything about touch screens and all that. So we had to build an application for factory automation. And so the story leads to, I go to a factory that does locomotive remanufacturing. They tear apart a locomotive all the way down to its bolts. And then the application we were trying to build used to be used by this technician who's wearing an overall, wearing gloves, and touch don't work. The key about what surprise that I learned, I got was, unlike the traditional software applications, industrial experiences are very different. So you got to put yourself in those experiences to design the right application. The second biggest surprise is, we talk about continuous integration, deployment, and all that here, but then the first question I get asked is, what's your 20-year roadmap? They build engines with a 20-year roadmap, and they're used to asking those questions, and so we've had to face those challenges, educating them on how software evolves and how they need to change. And we have done some good work with Eric Reyes, with Lean Startup, bringing down the cycle of how they build their assets, industrial equipment. And so those are the few good surprises. That's
great. These are great stories. I love that picture of that locomotive being broken down. One of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about at GitHub is the developer experience. The developer is really core. Clearly, developers are important parts of each of the groups that you're part of. But your developers also interact with this broad range of people who are very different, whether it's mechanical engineers or retail staff, farmers. So as you think about these expanding communities of workers and these very diverse communities of workers in your organizations, can you talk a little bit about what helps you collaborate across these different kinds of people?
So one of the biggest things that we had to do was educating them, like I've said, on how they should look at their requirements. So what we did to kick it off when we started was we bring all the product owners from these businesses who are going to consume the software and did training to them on how software gets built. It sounds as simple as that, but that's the reality. If you come from an industrial engineering background or a automation background, you really don't know what agility means. And so a lot of education had to be done collaboratively because they are an integral part of how we build software. They give us the requirements, so including them in the sort of the whole life cycle was very important. So we had to use various tools to enable that collaboration so that they play an integral part of the process.
Yeah, I think for us, we have the same challenge. We have, first of all, we're a global company, so we have research groups not only here in Palo Alto, but we have them in Dearborn, in Michigan, in Aachen, in Germany. We have a few others in Asia, in Australia. So collaborating across various continents and requirements, that's one of the challenges. The other one is exactly that, the difference between waterfall and agile. So most of the stuff that we did in the building cars has been waterfall, going from the requirements, passing them on to the tier 1 suppliers. Trying to educate people in doing agile development, it's been probably the biggest challenge and the biggest education gap that we've had so far. But with tools like this, it's definitely helping quite a bit to bridge that gap.
I mean, story is no different than in any other industry. But what I see, the biggest shift that is bringing collaboration between, in our case, merchants and engineers, and making them as part of one team and providing them tools to collaborate and bringing them in a platform or in a projects where they are part of the team. Earlier, it was very much like what Hima mentioned. We had a 2-year plan, and then you don't see. They give you requirement, you go create a plan, and then you go build the products and then show them, right? Now with more agile processes and collaborations, they are seeing the progress, giving you feedback. What it has enabled is not only from engineers who are start to understand domain better, but also what it has done is from the business owners started understanding technology better. And now it has opened up some different kind of interesting ideas that they say, oh, I can do this now, which they didn't thought earlier. And I think that's what this collaboration that brings, that probably I would say is the biggest change that I see.
I think that's actually really interesting. I mean, what you're saying here is the existence and success of some software projects inspires future success because it inspires us to think, that too could be done with software. That's actually a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to agree with you there, the idea of community, I think, is something that's really important for us because these people are coming from very different backgrounds. You've got the software engineers who would be happy writing everything in Markdown, and then other people who are used to using Word, maybe. Maybe you're on Microsoft SharePoint, whatever it is. So you need to build a community of people who don't have a common tool or a common language, and I think that's really tricky. We use GitHub Enterprise, and it's really helped us in many ways. We use it with Rally, and just today I heard about this Waffle IO thing, and that seems really exciting for us because it allows us to sort of have a Trello-like management tool, which is something that appeals to people at John Deere, but having it tied into our GitHub instance, and then it makes it easier for us to get around some of the corporate requirements around what software you are allowed to have and what software you aren't allowed to have. And the idea of having GitHub as sort of a platform that we can build on with other tools is really appealing.
Yeah, that's great. You use the word community, and that's also a word we spend a lot of time thinking about. One of the things that we've seen as different industries adopt software models is often, you've got a small software team here, and then you've got another small software team here. As you start making these shifts to really becoming software businesses, connecting these disparate software teams becomes really important. What are some of the things that you're doing around that? I mean, Hima, I think you guys have put it all in one place.
Yeah, so luckily for us, we consciously made a choice to keep the teams all co-located in San Ramon. And we know we'll get to a phase when we go beyond the 1 billion to 2 billion, we got to expand across. One of the things we do, and this is not something you would picture when you think of GE, we are a big XP shop, extreme programming shop. So the way it has enabled us within the location to sort of spread the knowledge across, to build a culture where the teams, there's not one focal point or one person who knows everything about a topic. So we do promiscuous pairing, we do a pretty good practice to distribute that knowledge. And so that has helped, to build the teams, and we sort of follow the 2-pizza rule, don't grow more than 10, break it up. We're not perfect, but sort of approaching these. And going back to the earlier point about, it's funny that when they see the software engineering teams practice that, a lot of the hardware engineers now want to practice, like they want to build an engine, 2 of them working together. So they get excited when they see these software practices.
Yeah, we've seen about the same thing here too. When we develop apps, we develop them. Sometimes we develop them in Palo Alto. We showcase them, but that's the prototype. We can work with the teams back in Dearborn to actually implement and then scale them. We work with tier 1 suppliers. We work with all kinds of other people here in the valley to help us with different aspects of that. So we're trying to distribute the software development exactly where someone has a core competency. Sometimes we do different changes for different markets. We may have different types of applications for, let's say, the electrified vehicles, which have different information than you would have for a gasoline-powered engine. So, for the gasoline-powered engine, you don't need to know when you have cheap electricity at home. If you have a plug-in electric vehicle or an electric vehicle, then you do need to know that. So there are some differences depending on the vehicle models, depending on regions. So all these need to come in the input, and therefore we have different teams that worry about different sections of the apps, and then we can bring them all together depending on who has the knowledge in that particular area.
So for us, really I don't know, how many of you are data scientists here? Anyone? you know, and same in
They're all in the
Target.
next panel.
Right, they're there. Really, initially, the thought was, hey, I'll do data science. I go focus on building a models, come back in 3 months, and hand it over, the results. What's changing is really a mindset of thinking of building model as a product. And what that has done is to shift them to become really a software engineers and using engineering practice to even build a model in an iterative fashion. And that's something was new at Target, where now looking back, when I started 1.5 years back and now, really it's data science is speaking a language of what usually a software engineer talks about, being iterations, and say, hey, yeah, I'm doing incremental changes. And that's what I see a biggest change that, as you bring in and, people from a different discipline and bring into this model of agile and software development. And I think it can be adopted, like you say,
Yeah.
now more hardware engineers want to do it. And I
Yeah.
think that can span to many, many other disciplines.
Right. So what you're saying is interesting. It's not just that Target is moving from being a retail company to a software company. It's that data scientists are moving from being data scientists to software developers. That's a really interesting transition. That's really, really cool. Michael.
Yeah, so unfortunately, unlike GE, we don't have a single co-located site where all of our teams work. And it definitely is a challenge for us. A previous project I worked on, we had maybe 200 people in the States, in and around Des Moines, and 50 people in Europe. And, well, actually, also a couple of people, maybe 60 in India. So trying to bring all the work together and just, I guess, the integration task there alone was really difficult, and the communication. So that's a challenge for us, and I think it's definitely a place where we can use tools to help improve things. We started to use Campfire, and then we were told we weren't allowed to use that. And then there was a different tool offering that we got, which we were allowed to use, and we jumped on there, and that's been really helpful. So this sort of Slack-style messaging, we actually use FlowDoc, which is from Rally, and it's been really, really helpful just to have this constant stream of consciousness from a development team, and you can jump in and you say, hey guys, our prod server is down, what's going on? And somebody's there all the time to answer your question. And for me, as a mobile app developer now, it's great because I go in and I'm saying, hey, guys, it's not running. And somebody from the platform team is there answering my questions, addressing my issues immediately. Whereas before, it might have been I'd have to go somewhere, try to find the phone number, try to get in touch with someone on the phone, and then they'd redirect me. And that's not really the way it should be done.
Right.
So, yeah, I think if you have the right tools in place, it can really enhance your ability to get things done quickly.
When we were talking before the panel started, you said something really interesting about giving developers permission.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about that?
So bringing GitHub to John Deere was an interesting sort of story. We officially used Subversion, so we had a multi-site Subversion install, lots of licenses, and it was the standard for the organization. I think it became the standard in 2012, so slightly behind the time. And the project I was working on actually used Mercurial, and that's much better than Subversion in my personal opinion. And we did pretty well with that, but I thought, hang on, there's something better out there, and I know that when I'm at home, if I'm working on software projects, I'm going to put it on GitHub because of this sort of social aspect around it. And I said to my manager, listen, can I try and install this? Can I try running this and see if anyone's interested and see if people are keen to get on board? And he just said yes. And he gave me permission to buy a certain number of licenses, and I had this thing running under my desk. And a couple of months later, we had 50, 60, 70 users from across the organization using it, and suddenly it's too late to go back. Officially, the company policy would have been, no, don't do that. And so I think that's one of the situations where by giving somebody permission to go ahead and just try something, you really get a huge benefit. And now we have, I think, about 1,200 seats for GitHub Enterprise across different servers. and people don't want to go back. So
We like to hear that. Cool. I want to open up for questions in the audience. I'm going to ask one more, so start thinking about your questions, and we'll get going to that. This idea of giving permission and seeing what comes up, from the teams themselves in terms of serendipitous innovation, building these communities across the company, having these, atoms and neurons sort of interacting with each other. I would love to just hear a quick snippet from each of you about what kind of emergent innovation you've seen from becoming this kind of software company.
So one of the things that, it's very hard as a leader to let go, to lose control. And so that's what we struggle with, especially coming from GE, which is a top-down sort of command control management. But one of the biggest changes we've seen is we sort of pivoted to a microservices architecture, and we have 8 teams in the platform space using 8 different languages to build those services. This could have never happened going back to the John Deere example. This would have not happened 2 years back, right? So the developers have the power to choose the language, to choose the platform, to choose the database that best suits whatever capabilities they provide. And so that transformation of organization, and we also look at that as the biggest challenge. The millennials get it, but we have a broad mix of sort of engineering teams where they are used to, if you've been in this industry long enough, you're told to do how, there isn't a notion of team empowerment, team power, team decision making. And so bringing that culture is harder than what people think it is. And so we spend a lot of time telling the teams it's okay to fail, it's okay to make those decisions, leave us out of the leadership out of the way, and the teams get to make those decisions. And that's the transition that we are in, transformation we are in, which will take time.
Yeah.
Yeah, for us it's very similar. So especially here in Palo Alto, we have also the curse of the distance because we're removed away from the mothership, so communication is hard. But at the same time, we also have a lot more freedom there. We don't have people looking over our shoulders telling us what not to do. So we have several teams that same thing. They're using whatever tools they want. They're developing apps. They're developing new hardware. They're developing mechatronics. And then when something cool comes out, we just showcase it. My favorite story is how we ended up with the Apple Watch app for Ford, because I had a guy that was fresh out of school. He just came one day, asked me, he's like, this was even before Apple released the watch. So like, can I develop an app for it? I'm like, sure, go ahead. And then 2 weeks later, he had a prototype. We had a visit from the CEO, and he ended up playing with the watch for at least half an hour. We almost stole the watch from him. And then we pushed it out to Dearborn for full development, and now you can get it from iTunes. So it was this kind of empowerment and freedom that allowed us to really quickly develop an app that people can now have and start their cars and lock doors and do all kinds of things with it.
That is so cool. That is so cool.
Yeah. So for me, it is really changing a mindset from buy to build. I think a lot of those, I kind of give credit to engineers and who went ahead, built something and then showcasing it. That can be done. And Git Enterprise, that what we use, really was started by one person, Dan, who is in the audience today, and he's going to talk tomorrow about it. Really, he went ahead and brought it in and started showcasing. And now we have 3,000 software engineers building and committing code into Git. So I think that's what it is, empowering engineers to go try out new things, embracing open source more, bring creativity, and let them come back and show what can be done. I think that's the key.
Yeah, that's great.
So one of the things that has inspired me and some of the other people in the community at John Deere has been these Spotify engineering culture videos that were going around. And the idea there that, it's driven by engineering, and if you want something, you're going to decide on how it's done, and then you have the freedom and the permission to go ahead and do it. And I think that, at the end of the day, engineers are people who build things, right? And so really, all you should have to do is put them in a room and say, build this. And anything ancillary to that, so process or build infrastructure or whatever it is, they should build that too, or at least decide on what it's going to be so that it suits their needs. And one of the challenges, I think, for traditional companies is to say, okay, I've got this engineer, this human resource, and he wants to go and work on a build system. And that's not what he should be doing. That's not what I hired him for. I hired him to work on my product, which I'm going to sell. And I think that the accepting that there is going to be some sort of loss of performance, that you are effectively, if you have a 100-man team, maybe you have an 80-man team and a 20-man support team, and the 20-man support team has to be just as qualified, if not maybe more qualified in some ways, than the 80 people actually writing the product, because they have to enable these other people to get their job done and not get distracted and not have to go through the pain of subversion commits on a daily basis, or whatever that pain point for you might be.
Awesome. No, it's a great story. I could go on forever. I have so many more questions, but I want to open up to the audience. Does anyone have a question? There's one over there. You know what? Should we bring a microphone over? Hold on.
All right. So Chris this morning talked about software being kind of a new frontier, or the next frontier. And so this is really for the hardware guys, where in recent years, we've made a lot of advances in how we develop software. We have essentially the ability to escape a lot of physical limitations. We can scale up, we can scale out, we can scale time. I'm curious how the hardware guys are trying to bring some of those concepts to the hardware they work on, which is really constrained by the physics and the reality of things. Are there any interesting challenges or techniques that you guys have employed to kind of escape those boundaries, like 3D printing or any other kind of ideas?
So I'll give you my our perspective, and in our sense, our hardware is a locomotive. So in that context, when we run the analytics, the data science, the whole value proposition that we want to provide is by taking example of how does a turbine react to wind and pressure, right? So you want to take that feedback, give it back to the design people, give it back to the physics people, and sort of make new composites that react better. So this closed loop between the data, outcomes from the data, feeding it back into the design stage is how we sort of merge the hardware or the industrial asset into the software space. That's the closed loop that we think about when we think about hardware and how it gets affected by the software.
Yeah, for us it's mostly simulation, right? So you can build an entire car, crash it, spin it all around, cut it in pieces, and it's all done in software before you even play with the first piece of metal. So the number of iterations you can have and the speed that you can design new cars through software simulation, it's amazing. Now sometimes we're running the risk of just keeping it in the computer too long before we actually release it in hardware, but the amount of simulation that we can run and the fidelity that you get out of it, it's simply amazing. And that's one of the ways it allowed us now to have the F-150 that's all aluminum bodied and nobody thought you can do it. And new materials, new processes, 90% of them done in simulation before we even cut the first piece of metal.
I'm going to see if there are more questions. Are there other questions in the audience?
So it was mentioned actually that you can't build a car through an MVP. You can't build a software product for a car through an MVP. Well, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because what did Elon Musk did with Tesla? What is Google doing right now with Google Car? Ain't that an MVP? And how is the auto industry going to learn from the software industry in that respect? And maybe the other way around, how is the software industry, Google and Tesla, are going to learn from the traditional automakers?
So again, typically when you talk about cars and you talk about MVP, it's the Model T, right? We've done that 100 years ago. So you can't go back to that. So I wouldn't say that Tesla released an MVP, right? It's a real car that needs to meet crash standards, and it needs to meet all kinds of other regulations, and it needs to be safe. So you can't go to the public and test all kinds of crazy ideas. You need to come up with something that's already solid, that's already been tested, that already meets a lot of requirements that in software you can't do. The other way, but we can always try the other things. I mean, I'm thinking A/B testing. We can probably start doing some of that, especially when it comes to the infotainment system. You can do A/B testing on, I don't know, the ABS system, because if one doesn't work, it's not acceptable. But in terms of where do you arrange the buttons, in theory we could do that. Then again, there are implications. That's the issue with automotive, is that even the buttons have like software buttons. I mean, on the AI have implications in terms of safety. If you can't find the right button, you start fiddling, and you spend more than 2 seconds trying to change the radio station. That in itself, it's not just annoying; it becomes a safety issue. So the implications are much more dire in our industry than just how do you interact with a phone. The other way around, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm just going to try to make sure we get a couple more questions in. There's one right here.
I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on recruitment and retention of software engineers, whether you find it, you're on a level playing field competing with Silicon Valley companies. Yeah, just general thoughts.
Can I get your email address? So the way we look at this is, industrial companies, and I'm including John Deere, GE, and others in this mix, is what you get to do is pretty interesting working at a company like this, right? We're getting to work with, all our childhood fascinations include trains and planes, and you're working with software that's dealing with that. It's life, it's life-changing. That's how we try to compete with them. The traditional social and other companies, you are building stuff that changes the world, that makes a big difference. It is hard, especially it's in San Ramon.
No, I mean, for us it is hard, but like you said, what we offer in exchange is especially for those who are passionate about cars, right? You can actually drive and see the things that you worked on, and it's kind of cool to change the software and then seeing it implemented in an actual vehicle that you can drive and show it to your friends what you did. So that passion for the final product, I think it's what differentiates us.
Talent is hard to find. I think whether it's a company like Target or it's startup, right? That's, since technology and software is becoming cornerstone for every industry, everybody needs talent. How do we attract? I think it's really a problem that you're trying to solve, and magnitude of impact that you can make to the business. And once you are able to kind of show the value and the work that they will be doing, I think a lot of people can relate and say, my work can make such a huge difference, whether making a better community or better business. But I think that's where you would see where, say, defining your problem better and making it purposeful. And I think that's what attracts a good talent.
So with John Deere, we don't really have development centers in San Francisco or in Paris or in London. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of Urbandale. It's near Des Moines in Iowa, or Kaiserslautern, which is where I work, and it's sort of in between Frankfurt and France, near Ramstein Air Force Base. Or Pune is probably the biggest city that we have a development center in, but that's in India. So attracting talent to places like that, I think, is a different there's a different value proposition there. And lots of the people who work for us and who are interested, they maybe have been farmers in the past, or their family was in farming, or they really like driving around tractors, because that's pretty much, that's a good time, right? You can sit in one of these things and it's like 40 tons and it's a couple of 100 horsepower, and you just know you could drive through anything. And yeah, that is going to put a smile on your face. I had one more point, but it slipped my mind, so I'm terribly sorry.
I would get lost in the tractor story as well. It sounds really cool. One last question. Who's got it? One right here. You. Yeah. There's Mike coming.
What experiences have you had dealing with communication challenges across disciplines? And then what advice would you have for someone like me, who's one of 2 developers at a 200-person behavioral science company, and we have challenges communicating value of features that we put in software and why it might be valuable for us, or why it might be valuable to the scientists or data analysts?
So that's definitely something that is very interesting to me as well, and to people at Deere. So we have people coming from lots of different backgrounds who at the end of the day are trying to serve these farmers who have very clearly defined needs in terms of what they need to do legally and things like that. But they also have sort of user needs. And one of the changes that's happened recently in the last couple of years at John Deere is user experience has become a really big thing. And so the idea that, hey, your vehicle, your tractor, it can be friendly too. You can look at it and think, well, maybe if I push this button, it's just going to work. And there's obviously the safety aspect of that. It's got to be very clear and easy to use, and it can't be ambiguous. And so that's one place where we've really pushed out. But one of the problems we do have is sort of communicating between somebody who understands the requirements of a farmer and then somebody who doesn't. And so I'm not from a farming background, and it's hard for me to really understand sometimes if I'm driving a tractor around, why can't I just do this? And I think having a process around defining requirements and measuring them and being able to document requirements in a way that is going to convince people and having that written down is really, really useful for communicating that stuff and making sure that everybody can see the value behind something.
So one of the things that has helped us is we always look at it from what value does it provide to the customers. So the way we look at it is our whole reason of investing in software is to enable reduce unplanned downtime. So every question that we ask, is this a requirement, is driven by how much or will it help customers run their planes on time, run their trains on time, and that's what helps us prioritize. The second thing which I want to leave with is transparency. These organizations have been used to having control over everything, so breaking down those barriers has been very important so that we completely expose what our backlog is, how we prioritize. They attend our sprint planning, they attend our release planning, so making it a very transparent process help them realize how they play a role in it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, one thing I'm really excited about what we have here in Palo Alto is that we don't have only engineers. We have maybe 60% engineers, but we also have user experience. We have industrial design, we have ethnographers, we have marketing and sales. So we're all working together to develop these products. It's, again, from a very personal experience when 15 years ago when I was at BMW and when we're only a bunch of engineers, what do engineers do? They love to throw features, right? Feature, 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 without being coherent. As soon as we got one marketing person that finally guided us, it's like, well, this makes sense to me. This will sell, this will not sell, this meets the brand, this doesn't meet the brand. So bringing all this sort of softer side of the business to develop software together with the engineers, I think that's a winning proposition because otherwise, as I said, engineers love to do features that may not make sense for the final user.
I would say really understand the business and business metrics. I think that's where we drive. Really, it's driven by data and build a product that allows you to collect the metrics and measure them and be transparent about it. And once you have a right metrics, which are kind of outside emotion, there's no human emotion, really, data speaks. And if you're able to prove that, it's either you really building a product that's going to make a difference or not, and whether you want to continue or not. And engage, right? Engage your customers, where if you're doing something, going in a new field, which is going to be implemented, say behavior science, and you wanted to apply that to marketing, have them come in, tell what they're trying to solve, where are their pain points, and how you can help them overcome those pain points.
That's awesome. Big thank you to all of you for coming up here and sharing your stories. Super inspiring. Thank you so much.